Hello and welcome.
Wasteland is an 18-issue series written by John Ostrander and Del Close, illustrated by a variety of artists. It was published by DC between 1987 and 1989. First and foremost, Wasteland was an anthology title. Each issue contained 3 short stories that were primarily modern horror, but it delved into satire and autobiographical pieces based on Del Close's life. Oddly enough, despite the variety of subjects, time periods, and tone, it was amazingly consistent throughout. One of the very unique aspects about Wasteland, and there are many, is it had a regular art team for the first year. There were 4 artists: George Freeman, Don Simpson, David Lloyd, and William Messner-Loebs. One artist would do the cover, and the other 3 would illustrate the interior stories. Then they'd rotate each month. So, each artist was represented in every issue. This was quite unlike other anthology titles. Historically, the artists for any given title were inconsistent, and it usually relied on who was available that month. While the artists had their own unique styles, they looked like an organic or complementary mix when compiled together in one title. It was a reasonably fluid, artistic combination that added a level of coherency to a series without an ongoing plot and very few recurring characters. George Freeman would leave after the 9th issue for unspecified reasons. With the 12th issue, William Messner-Loebs would leave to focus on writing Johnny Quest for Comico and The Flash for DC. That same issue, David Lloyd also left to illustrate the final parts of V for Vendetta. For the remaining issues, the artistic roster included Rick Magyar, Bill Ray, Joe Orlando, and Michael Davis, with the occasional contribution from Tim Truman and Ty Templeton. Don Simpson was the only original artist to remain with the title until its conclusion. Prior to Wasteland, John Ostrander had established himself as an interesting new voice in comics. He co-created Grimjack with Tim Truman for First Comics, took on the writing duties for Firestorm, and he reimagined the obscure team Suicide Squad as a group of supervillains coerced into servicing a greater good. That is an impressive beginning to a career. Ostrander and Del Close had met through the Chicago theater scene and became friends. Previously, they had co-written the Munden's Bar backup feature in Grimjack, so they had an established dynamic before proposing Wasteland to the editor, Mike Gold. Del Close needs a special mention. While never a well-known name to the general public, his influence is unbelievably massive, especially in the improv comedy scene. He performed and directed both the Second City casts in Chicago and Toronto, and he was the house director for the San Francisco group, The Committee. Basically, improv comedy as it exists today, the techniques and the form, was heavily influenced or crafted by Del Close. The list of talent he fostered is, well, staggering. Practically the entire original cast of Saturday Night Live were students of Close, as were Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and Mike Myers, to name very, very few examples. It may not be an exaggeration to suggest that a high percentage of the well-known comedians from the 1970s through the early 90s were impacted to some degree by Close's teaching or influence. By all accounts, Close was an exceptional person who led an unusual life. At the very least, that was his reputation. Within Wasteland, snippets of his life are presented as being mostly factual, with a little fiction mixed in to create a stronger narrative thread. These autobiographical bits are scattered through the series and don't tell an overall story. They are simply interesting, dramatic moments from an interesting, bizarre life. According to Ostrander, Close wasn't concerned whether these personal stories were true, just that they felt real. So their accuracy is suspect. But they do contain a level of authenticity that may be difficult to manufacture. Worth a brief mention is an odd production error. The cover for issue number 6 was used for issue number 5, so that issue was recalled and printed with the correct cover. As a result, issue number 6 is called The Real Number 6, and the image space on the cover is left blank, since that artwork had already been used. So there are 2 versions of issue number 5, with 2 different covers. Overall, Wasteland is a rather unique title, with adult themes and short, dark episodes that seem very out of place within a title published by a mainstream company, and this is all accomplished in 8-page segments. Of course, not all stories are created equally, but none feel like filler. Each story has a distinct point of view, explored within an economical amount of space. Some endings do feel a touch arbitrary or abrupt, but that contributes to the sense of surreal experimentation the series represents. The best of Wasteland is difficult to compile. The material is so varied, it's hard to suggest one piece may be better than another, and it's all subjective, depending on one's taste. As a surreal, autobiographical piece, Sewer Rats from the first issue is quite well done. It's nonsensical, but amusing. The two-part story, On the Road, from issue 6 and 7, is also quite interesting. This was a real-life episode experienced by Close as part of a traveling theater group. It's likely given a lot of structure and shape than the actual events, but that doesn't detract from the story at all. Then there's the Harvey Pekar-styled story, American Squalor, from issue number 3. It's also illustrated in a Robert Crumb manner. As an example of existentialism and self-doubt, it is quite lovely. The story, Heebie-Jeebies, from issue number 8, is a great example of a relationship falling apart over a very simple idea: loving someone no matter what flaws they may possess. In 8 pages, one sees a passionate relationship deteriorate over the premise that one can never truly know another individual. From issue number 10, The Dreamer in the Darkness charts H.P. Lovecraft's final days as he accepts he's dying from cancer, not a venereal disease like his parents. Lovecraft wasn't the only known figure to make an appearance. Close and L. Ron Hubbard allegedly knew one another, and the story, Del and L. Ron, explores an auditing session between the two. It focuses on Hubbard's well-documented disdain for psychiatry. Perhaps the most controversial story was Dissecting Mr. Fleming, from issue number 11. In it, a protective parent literally dissects a biology teacher for traumatizing his son by coercing him to dissect a frog in class. It's not a tame story, and it is more graphic than most stories in the series. It makes one wonder how it managed to make it through editorial without being vetoed. That said, it is very well done and quite horrific. Near the end, Wasteland was getting close to cancellation, but it wasn't. It was a title that never sold well, but it could have continued on for a little longer than it did. However, it was a difficult series for Ostrander to write. So, late in the series, with sales that were okay but not impressive, Ostrander, Close, and the editor, Mike Gold, decided to call it a day on their terms, before someone at DC made that decision for them. The result was the first and only story that filled the entire issue from beginning to end. It was written using the improvisational method Close called the Herald. This method incorporated as much of the work that preceded it as possible, while bringing everything together to a natural conclusion. It opens on the only recurring character other than Close, the dead detective, and the first line is somewhat appropriate. This will probably never make any sense. It seems like a warning to the readers, and an acknowledgement by the writers that creating a full-length story out of 17 issues of short stories is probably going to be a difficult task. Although, there are a fair amount of callbacks and reappearances by characters from prior episodes. Ultimately, it does manage to end exactly where it began, with an appearance of the deadly mushroom, Fugu. As a conclusion, it's mostly tidy, well-paced, and it arrives at a good stopping point. It's not overly sentimental, nor self-congratulatory. It feels like a release, like these absurd ideas have been written about and released into the wild. In the end, Wasteland is a title that exists in its own unique niche. It is surreal, but accessible. It is dark, but also illuminating. It has a shifting point of view, but a consistent voice. It's modern horror with an existential or emotional core, but it's also a very visceral experience. This is a balance that is difficult to achieve with any coherency. Yet, Wasteland manages this task from episode to episode and from issue to issue. This video is brought to you courtesy of these very fine people. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to click the subscribe button and support Overlord Comics. If you'd like to go a step further, click the join button and choose the option most suitable for you. Until next time.